I'm just going to jump right in to the depth of this matter. When last week we ended the second story of the creation of humanity, Adam and Eve, in their blissful paradise of the Garden of Eden, so vulnerably open and in love that they were both naked and ashamed. And even if we didn't know the rest of the story that follows, we do know intuitively what happens next. The crisis, the conflict that makes every story a story. There's setting and character development and plot and crisis and resolution. Paradise is never bliss forever. Here's what happened according to the passage that followed last week's, this morning's, from Genesis 3, 1 through 7. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." That is, everything. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. For the last 2 weeks, we've been looking at the first 2 chapters in the book of Genesis in hopes of finding some clues to the question of the psalmist, "What are human beings, O God, that you are mindful of us? Mortals, that you care for us?" In these 2 chapters, we have seen that the genius of the Hebrew mind 3,000 years ago had an understanding of the answer to this in terms of the human condition, the answer to who we are and what makes us tick. And it is infinitely, as they understood it, complicated, infinitely complicated and mysterious and miraculous. That we can even ask the question, who am I, who are we, that we are curious enough about it and have words to express the question, points to the miraculous fact itself, that we have been made a little lower than the angels, crowned with glory and honor. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that our beloved late golden retriever Yates never sat around pondering the question, what is dog that God is mindful of me? He may, however, have wondered what are those weird humans that they are mindful of me, and why do I spend so much time being mindful of them? But I'm not even sure with Yates the dog that there was any sense of his me-ness and our ourness. It was just a sense of we-ness together. Not a bad way to go through life on some level of consciousness. I actually had a friend in Atlanta who would come to Bible study and protest whenever we got too deep and philosophical about these things, claiming that talking about it only made him more confused and agitated, and that he would hope that we would just keep things simple so he could stay a happy idiot. Those were his words. So I guess based on his terms, I would call myself an unhappy idiot, especially by choosing to try and make sense of this nonsensical question, the human condition, in 4 sermons when 4 million aren't enough. But of course, from my perspective, it seems to me that the minimum of what makes us human is that we can at least ask the question and dive into it, no matter how deep it is. Who are we? Who is God? Thanks to modern science, yes, we are closer to the answer of what we are and how we work than we've ever been, yet we are not any closer to the deeper metaphysical answer, the spiritual, the moral, the religious answer of who are we and why are we? Why do we have, each of us, our own essence, our own personality, our own soul and dignity and spiritual energy? Why are we more than the sum of the evolutional parts, more than the sum of the environment that has had its way with us? Why do we sometimes do what we don't want to do and don't do what we do want to do, as Paul says? Who are we? We are a conundrum to ourselves, which is why people of faith turn to the realization, the epiphany found in the scriptures, and especially these first 2 chapters in Genesis, of hopefully finding a clue. 2 weeks ago, when we looked at the first story in Genesis, God creating the world in 7 days, culminating with Adam being created in God's image, both male and female, in God's image, the last act of creation where God claimed it was very good, not just good, and giving the first humans, Adam and Eve, dominion, stewardship, management over all of creation for them to serve and to care for and to use for their own civilization. This Adam in the first story I will call Adam 1. Adam 1 was the crown of creation, made in the image of God, a little lower than the angels, it says, given responsibility of mastering God's creation for the good of society and civilization. In this story, God spoke and said, "Let there be," and it was so, and God told them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, which means God would stay away, keep God's distance, and let these humans do their job. It was a laissez-faire kind of relationship. Adam 1 would manage things with industry, success, and engineering, science, governance, working together in a relationship for the common good. That was the charge. When Adam 1 lived up to his vocation, he became a creature of majesty and honor and dignity. According to the Psalm, dignity, which in Hebrew simply means one who lives up to his potential, who does not give in, who is not helpless, but instead productive, using his gifts and resources for the highest honor and gain. A farmer who tills his soil, learns about fertilizer, learning to switch the crops from time to time, learning how to make money and buy a John Deere tractor to help make more crop, switching here and there with new scientific findings, understanding that machinery matters, production capacity matters, good use of labor and material matters. This is a dignified person in Hebrew. This is majestic man, the explorer Adam. This is the curious, inventive, technological, educated, researching, fixing, healing, doing Adam. It's honorable and dignified. This aggressiveness, this assertiveness, this defiance, this boldness and victory-minded reaching for the stars is who we are as created in the image of God. And if that's so, then in this sense, an undignified person is the farmer who sits on his fanny, hoes a little here and there from time to time, expecting a miracle from God or somebody else to do all the work. The one who does not live up to this God potential, the Hebrew word would say, is undignified. And each one of us is gifted with our own potential, some more than others. Some because the environment gives us less potential than others. That makes us undignified too. This scientist, Adam 1, this researcher, this engineer, this practical Adam 1, we wouldn't have medicine, we would have no vaccines, we would have no civilization without. It is the Adam 1 in all of us that drives us for solution and success. The best example of Adam 1, I think, is Frank Sinatra's famous song, I Did It My Way. The last verse goes, "For what is man, what has he got? If not himself, then he has not. To say all the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows, but I did it my way." And we know the rest of the story, that as Sinatra sang with pride these words after 4 marriages and 6 other broken relationships, after being estranged from his children, it was ironically a song of tragedy as much as it was success, of hurt as much as heroism. Without tragedy and hurt, we also know that there is no journey toward heroism. There is no story without crisis, which sets up for us the second story from last week. Adam 1 is not enough. Adam 2, we call him, came first rather than last, before anything else. Even before the Garden of Eden, the temptation and the fall was confronted with his own conflicts and complications. He was lonely and troubled. Adam 1 walks in the Garden of Creation and wonders how he can make it more productive. Adam 2 stops to smell the roses, takes in the magnificence of the sunsets, rests in the beauty of things, but he also has wanderlust. He has bouts of melancholy. He feels loneliness and anxiety over not being enough. He wonders, what does it mean? And even though he had been given everything he needed to thrive and flourish in this paradise, even a partner, flesh of flesh and bone to bone, so trustingly vulnerable with each other that they were naked and unashamed, Adam too and Eve were not satisfied. Why? Because they were estranged from their Creator. In the story of Adam 2, instead of the last act of creation, God creates Adam 2 first, just not appearing as God did so in the first and create Adam 1, but reaches down and grabs a handful of dirt and molds it into the first human until there's no, which is still dirt, it's still a mold until God blows breath into it and becomes then a living being. This humanness of us, that we're both from the ground, the dirt, dust to dust and ashes to ashes, and from God's magnificent spirit breath that gives us life. While Adam 1 is striving for success and subduing, driven as much by ego and conflict, Adam 2 knows that he is not ultimately successful on his own, nor self-sufficient, not so practical, not so driven. And in his inner being, he struggles with feeling lonely and estranged. Maybe because Adam 2 was created alone. Eve came later. He struggles. He struggles with his mortality, his neediness, his yearning for connection to himself and to God and to others. That's how we left last week's story. There's no such thing as Edenic paradise and bliss. No such thing of humanity coming to understand that we are perfect in a perfect paradise. That there is a perfectly good life, that everything in this garden is going to be perfect. No such thing. And God set it up this way. According to this story, God placed in this garden the tree of knowledge, the fullness of knowing God's godness, of knowing what's true and not true, everything of goodness and evil. He puts this tree in the garden, knowing dadgum well that sooner or later Adam too and Eve are going to have to turn to it and taste it. It came out of their humanness, their struggle. There is this defiance there that is part of Adam 1, as much a part of Adam 2, to search for answers. And inevitably, they would have to face it, their temptation, and eat. And not only that, but God gives a character to help them do it. The serpent, who was more cunning than all the other animals that were created. Why did God create the serpent more cunning than all the other animals? So that he could be this serpent cunning like a good politician, using fiction from fact and misinformation and causing us to doubt the propriety of things and the truth of things just enough to question our motives and what is true anyway, to doubt the fact that the scientists say we should wear a mask, to doubt the fact that we are really not fully knowledgeable about much. This story for Christianity, you see, is the fall story. It's the place where we claim the humanity fell from grace, from God's grace, and because of that, we had to wait for the Redeemer Christ to come and save us through Christ's sacrifice. I won't get into that today. That's worth another 4 sermons or so. But what I would like to say is that the Christian story, while being our story, is not the story that was written by the Hebrew genius some 3,000 years ago. Yes, we do all fall short of the glory of God. Yes, we do have within us some need to break that relationship with God, to sin. But to see this story as the Hebrews saw it is a whole different perspective. You won't die, the serpent said. Your eyes will be opened and you will be just like God, knowing good from evil. And it looks so good, a delight, so promising and tasty and delicious, as every temptation does. It's never good versus bad. It's good versus a greater good. It's not because it's destructive, but because it promises so much that it is a temptation. And in this case, to be like God. And if we remember in this first creation story, they had already been given that, made in God's image. Yet they still felt, according to the second creation story, that they didn't have enough. So here comes this hapless, lonely Adam tempted by Eve. The patriarchal Christian story goes. This Eve, this tramp, this temptress, giving in and then eating of the forbidden fruit because the serpent, the devil, which I don't think the serpent is meant to be in the story after all. The devil made me do it, and then tempts Adam to do the same. And because woman was the first one to fall, woman should not therefore have any authority or office in church. That's not the story. The story is that they both became aware, they both became conscious of their own condition, they both knew that they were not like God, they both confronted that fact, and because of that fact, they felt compelled to reach for the apple and eat. It was their estrangement from God, not their wanting to be just like God, but to be wanting to be with God, that was the temptation. And in that moment, they discovered, their eyes were opened, and they saw goodness and evil, and they discovered how much unlike God they truly were. That which was latent in their deep depths of consciousness was now conscious to them, and they could see who they were. And the second creation story ends with, and the man and the wife were both naked and not ashamed. And in this story, it ends with, their eyes were open and they both knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves, and they were now ashamed of their beingness. They were ashamed of their beingness, of being all too human, of being alone, estranged from God, estranged from each other, estranged from themselves. And all they wanted was to be reconnected, reconciled and redeemed to the one, the only one that they thirst for. And for the Hebrew scholars that I read, you see, this event is not the fall event as much as it is the blessing event. Yes, it is a fall, just as Icarus must fall as he goes too high to find himself grounded back on earth. It is the fall event that Adam 1 has to face, that success and ego is a good thing by God, but that it is not the only thing, that we are also fragile, searching, finite and mortal and afraid. And until Adam too fell, he couldn't face this fragileness, his human self, both sides of himself. And for these scholars, these Hebrew scholars, this whole thing was planned. This whole thing was part of God's plan of creation. The serpent, not the devil, but the tool to question, really a question every human should have. What does it mean to be like God? And this whole garden scene, therefore, is a setup. For God had to create it, if God is omniscient and omnipotent, to know that Adam and Eve would certainly eat of the tree. I mean, why else did he stick it there right under their noses, knowing that the prohibition is the very thing that wants them to have it the most? This Adam 1, who was hell-bent on success and achieving and becoming and producing and mastering and owning and subduing, is part of the dignity of God, but not alone. Only with Adam 2, the broken, vulnerable, lonely, imperfect, and even ashamed human in need. Success and failure, subdue, dominion, retreat, give up. Own, be humbled. Strong, struggle. We are both. We are both. These are the two things that make us human. One without the other only makes us helpless, undignified victims. The other without the one makes us bestial and boastful and brutish. Adam 1 and Adam 2 are the yin and yang of being human, our strength and our humility, our defiance and our failure. And I came to see this dichotomy, this dialectical condition of being human when I was 49. I knew it intellectually, but I didn't understand it existentially until At 49, when in a really tragic and dramatic car accident, first wife Nancy died, and the girls were in the car, and it was made even more dramatic by the fact that Megan was driving even though it wasn't her fault. It was an Explorer rollover that happened on I-285 in 2001. And I had no idea after the fact how we would get through this. I was scared about the girls and how they would respond. I was scared if I would have enough strength and energy to get through what needed to happen. I was scared about the vacuum of her loss. I was just scared and afraid. I didn't know if I had it, what it took. And so I would gather the girls every night together, and we would get on the bed, and our prayer was the same night after night. Oh God, thank you for getting us through the day and give us strength to get through tomorrow. And I became aware, you see, of my own human condition, that on the one hand, we were deeply in need of God's strength and power, just like Adam too. But we also had within us this strength of defiance and success and not giving up and not letting the buggers get us down, as Churchill said. Never giving in as an act of defiance against the powers of death and darkness. Don't ever give in. But sooner or later, of course, we will. But don't ever. But we will. That's us. Here's the thing. This is a blessing. This is what makes us fully human. It is a good thing when we experience our own humbled fall. There is no journey without it. There is no story without it. There is no becoming without it. It's a setup, not for God's sake, but for our own, so that we will become who God intended for us to become. This complicated, complex, contradictory being that is a little lower than the angels, yet higher than the beasts. Next week, we'll see what happens next. Amen.